I never thought one moment could change everything. But when I saw it, when my eyes locked onto that sight, I just knew, that nothing would ever be the same again. It hit me all at once, like a slap I never saw coming. 1 second, I was just me, a wife, a mother, a stepmother. And then, in a blink, I was someone else entirely. Someone I never expected to become. I remember that night so vividly. Not because it was special. No, that was the problem. It was just another night. The house was quiet. My husband was where he always was, somewhere else. Distant. Absent. And then I saw him. Not my husband. No, my stepson. It was an accident, really. A flicker of movement from the corner of my eye. His door, slightly open. A space where I wasn't supposed to look. But I did. And the second I did, something shifted inside me. I froze. Time stretched. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the blood rushing to my ears. I should have looked away. I should have walked away. But I didn't. That was the moment. That split second. That choice I didn't even know I was making. I had no idea that, in that instant, I had just crossed an invisible line. And from that point on, there was no turning back. I know what you're thinking. How did it get to this? I've asked myself the same question a million times. But the truth? The truth is never simple. The truth is messy. Twisted. The truth is that sometimes you don't realize you're lost until you're too far gone to find your way back. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where everything changed in an instant? Where you crossed a line you didn't even know was there? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more shocking, true confessions, hit subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. I used to believe that love, once strong, never truly fades. That even in the quiet, even in the distance, something remains, something worth holding onto. But I was wrong. It's been years since he looked at me the way he used to. Years since I felt anything more than a shadow in his world. I can't even remember the last time he reached for me, the last time he saw me, not just as his wife, not just as the mother of his children, but as a woman. I used to try. I really did. I waited up for him at night, made his favorite meals, wore the dresses I knew he once loved. But nothing changed. He was always too busy, too tired, too distracted. And slowly, I stopped trying. I became invisible. Our home, it wasn't always like this. I remember when we moved in, how we filled the empty spaces with laughter, with promises of forever. I remember the way he used to reach for my hand at the dinner table, how he would kiss my forehead just because. But that was another lifetime. Now, our dinners are silent. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful but heavy, thick with everything we don't say. He barely looks up from his phone. When I speak, I feel like I'm talking to a man who isn't really there. Maybe because he isn't. I don't ask where he goes when he comes home late. I don't ask why his phone is always face down on the table, why he showers the moment he walks through the door. I don't ask because deep down, I already know. He's having an affair. I don't have proof. I don't need it. You can feel when a man has left you. You can feel it in the way he stops noticing, stops caring, stops coming home for anything more than sleep. I used to cry about it. Now, I just exist. But I'm not the only one who feels the weight of this house. There's my stepson. He's polite, always has been. Never disrespectful, but distant. He's always been quiet, withdrawn, like someone carrying a burden too heavy to share. I don't know much about his world, about what goes on inside his head. He keeps to himself. He barely speaks. And yet, lately, I feel like I've been noticing him more. Noticing the way his eyes linger on me a second too long. The way his posture stiffens when I enter the room. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I just want someone, anyone, to see me again. Because the truth is, I'm lonely. And loneliness, it does things to you. It makes you think things, feel things, crave things you shouldn't. And in this house, in this cold, empty place, where my husband is nothing more than a stranger in our bed, I feel it more than ever. That night, when I saw him through the crack of his door, that moment didn't just happen in isolation. It was the result of years of silence, of distance, of a marriage that had slowly unraveled thread by thread. And as much as I wanted to forget what I saw, I couldn't, because something had changed, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it to go back. It was late. The kind of late where the house hums with silence, where the walls hold secrets in the dark. I had no reason to be awake. Maybe it was habit, another night spent waiting for a husband who wouldn't come home on time, another night wandering through a house that no longer felt like mine. I was heading to the kitchen, my bare feet brushing against the cold floor, when I saw it. His door. Slightly open. Just enough. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't thinking anything. I was just passing by, until I wasn't. Because there he was. Sitting on the edge of his bed, his back to me. His body tense, shoulders squared. The glow of his screen painted his face in sharp contrast, eyes locked, breathing slow, measured. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. I don't know what made me stop. I don't know what made me look longer than I should have. But I did. And that's when it hit me, the slow, creeping realization of what I was seeing. A flicker of confusion at first, then understanding. Then, something else. I should have turned away. I should have walked away. But my feet wouldn't move. There was something about the way he sat there, lost in his own world, unaware of me standing just outside his door. Something that made my chest tighten, made my breath catch. I don't know how long I stood there. Seconds? Minutes? Time felt stretched, elongated, like I was caught between something I didn't understand and something I didn't want to admit. Then, as if sensing me, he shifted slightly. And I panicked. I tore my gaze away, heart pounding as I hurried down the hall, as if I'd done something wrong. As if I was the one who should feel ashamed. But it wasn't shame I felt. It was something else entirely. A strange, unsettling discomfort that settled deep in my stomach, something that lingered even as I poured myself a glass of water, even as I tried to shake the image from my mind. I told myself it was nothing. Just an accident. A meaningless moment. But the thoughts wouldn't stop. Was it normal? Was it just me? Was I imagining something that wasn't there? Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just feeling invisible. I was feeling something else. And I didn't know what to do with it. I told myself it was nothing. Just a meaningless moment. A trick of the mind. But my body disagreed. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, in the way my skin prickled at the memory, in the way my breath came just a little too short whenever the thought crept back in. I shook it off, pushed it down, buried it under the weight of routine. But routine was different now. Something had changed, even if I didn't want to admit it. At breakfast the next morning, I felt it. The shift. The unspoken thing sitting between us at the table. My husband, as usual, was already halfway out the door, his briefcase in one hand, his phone in the other. He muttered something about a meeting, a schedule too packed for anything else. I barely heard him, because my stepson was sitting across from me, and he wasn't looking at me. Not once. I waited for it, the usual glance, the casual nod, the mindless small talk that we always exchanged. But it never came. His eyes stayed on his plate, his shoulders tense. And I felt it, that same pressure in the air, thick and charged with something unspoken. Had he seen me last night? Did he know? I wanted to say something. I should have said something. But my tongue felt heavy, tied in knots I didn't know how to untangle. And then, just as he stood up to leave, it happened. A hesitation. So small, so quick, I almost missed it. But I didn't. Because for a fraction of a second, before he turned away, before he walked out of the room, he paused. A flicker. A moment. A glance that never fully formed. And that was when I knew. He felt it too. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but my mind never left that morning, never left that tension that sat between us like a wall neither of us knew how to break down. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was making something out of nothing. But then I started noticing things. Little things. The way he lingered when we spoke, as if searching for words he couldn't find. The way he avoided my gaze when I entered a room, like looking at me was something he couldn't afford. The way my own heart reacted to his presence, too fast, too aware, too much. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to pretend I didn't feel the way the air changed when he was near, the way my skin tingled when he brushed past me. But once you notice something, you can't unnotice it. And I noticed everything. The way his voice would drop just slightly when he spoke to me. The way his fingers would tap against the table, restless, whenever I was too close. The way his chest would rise and fall, slow and steady, when I walked past him. It wasn't one thing. It was all of it. And it was growing. Every moment. Every day. Thicker. Heavier. Like a storm waiting to break. I tried to fight it. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, in the quiet corners of my mind, in the places I didn't want to explore, I knew the truth. I wasn't imagining it. And neither was he. It was late again. The house was dark, silent, wrapped in the kind of stillness that makes every small sound feel louder, heavier. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular as I stepped into the kitchen, just another sleepless night, another moment spent drifting through a home that no longer felt like my own. And then I saw him. Standing by the sink, his back turned, the dim glow of the refrigerator light casting sharp angles on his bare shoulders. Shirtless. I should have turned around. I should have walked back to my room. But I didn't. Something about the way he stood there, so still, made my feet freeze in place. He must have heard me, sensed me, because slowly, he turned. And then our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the fridge, the slow drip of the faucet, it was the only sound between us. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full, weighted, thick with something unspoken. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in that moment, that pause that stretched too long. Then he finally broke it. Couldn't sleep? His voice was low, quieter than usual. I shook my head, feeling the dryness in my throat, the sudden awareness of every inch of my skin. No. You. He exhaled, barely a sound. Same. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his chest, the muscles in his forearms flexing slightly. I shouldn't have been looking. I shouldn't have noticed. But I did. And I hated how my pulse quickened because of it. I turned to the sink, pretending to fill a glass with water, trying to act normal, trying to breathe. But I could still feel his eyes on me. Not like before. Not like when we exchanged polite words, forced conversations. This was different. This was charged. I glanced at him, just for a second. And that was my mistake. Because in that second, everything was clear. The hesitation in his posture. The tension in his jaw. The way his fingers gripped the edge of the counter just a little too tightly. I wasn't imagining it. It was real. I swallowed hard, forcing a small laugh, trying to break whatever was happening. Maybe it's the house, I said, my voice lighter than I felt. Too quiet sometimes. He nodded, but his expression didn't change. And then he said something I wasn't ready for. It's not just the house. A simple sentence. Soft. Careful. But it hit me like a wave. My breath caught in my chest, but I forced myself to keep my face neutral. No. He shook his head slowly. No, another beat of silence. The moment stretched too far. And I needed to stop it. I set my glass down too hard, the sound breaking through the thick air. I forced a smile, a breathy little laugh that didn't belong. We should sleep. His gaze didn't leave mine, but after a second, he nodded. Yeah. Neither of us moved. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I couldn't name, something that both terrified and thrilled me. I turned first. Walked away too fast. Closed my bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, heart pounding. I told myself it was nothing. I was just lonely. I was just imagining things. But deep down, in the part of me that still remembered what it felt like to be wanted, I knew. Something had shifted. And there was no undoing it. I should have stayed away. I told myself that night in the kitchen was nothing. A fluke. A meaningless moment stretched too far by a restless mind. But if that were true, why did I keep thinking about it? Why did I find myself replaying his words in my head? It's not just the house. Why did I feel a thrill I shouldn't have felt? A pull I shouldn't have acknowledged? Days passed, but the tension didn't fade. It grew. Quiet, invisible, yet always there. Every glance. Every accidental touch. Every silence stretched a little longer than it should have. And then, it happened. Another night. Another mistake. I don't even remember why I was walking past his room again. Maybe I wasn't thinking. Maybe I wasn't fully awake. Maybe, deep down, I already knew what I was doing. But when I passed his door, it was open again. And this time, he saw me. He wasn't turned away like before. He wasn't lost in his own world, unaware of my presence. He was facing me, watching me, and I stopped breathing. For a moment, neither of us moved. I should have turned around, walked away, pretended I didn't see him. But I didn't, because something in his eyes held me there. Not just surprise, not just embarrassment. Something else. Something darker. Something that made my chest tighten, my pulse race. He didn't look away, and neither did I. A silent war raged in that space between us. 1,000 unspoken words. 1,000 thoughts neither of us dared to say aloud. I felt my heart hammering, felt the air between us shrink, suffocating. And then, he spoke. A whisper, so soft I barely heard it. "Why do you keep looking?" My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't have an answer. I didn't want to have an answer. I should have scolded him. Should have told him he was out of line. Should have said anything to break the tension, to make this moment disappear before it turned into something neither of us could undo. But I didn't. Because he wasn't wrong. I had been looking, and we both knew it. He exhaled slowly, a sound more like a confession than a breath. His jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists at his sides, as if he were physically holding himself back. And for the first time, I felt it, the full weight of what we were doing. The slow unraveling of a line we had been towing for too long. I was the adult. I was the one who should have stopped this before it even started. But I couldn't ignore the truth pressing down on me like a weight I wasn't strong enough to lift. I wanted him to look at me like that. I wanted to feel seen again. And he was the only one who saw me. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work, forcing the words out even as they scraped against my throat. Go to bed. A command. A plea. A last attempt at control. He didn't argue. Didn't push. He just nodded, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving mine. I turned and walked away, my legs weak, my pulse roaring in my ears. But even as I closed my bedroom door, even as I sank onto my bed, I knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. I barely slept that night. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to have. I kept replaying it over and over. The way he looked at me, the way his voice had dropped to that whisper, low and deliberate. Why do you keep looking? I had no answer then. I still had no answer now. But I knew what I felt. And that was the problem. By morning, the weight of it had settled deep inside me, like a stone in my chest. Guilt. Shame. Confusion. They pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, making it hard to move, hard to breathe. I avoided him. It was the only thing I could do. I spent the day going through the motions, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't. It would never be normal again. At breakfast, I kept my head down, my hands tight around my coffee cup, gripping it like an anchor. My husband sat across from me, scrolling through his phone, muttering something about his schedule. I barely heard him, because I could feel him, sitting just a few feet away, silent, still. I didn't look up, but I knew he was doing the same thing, avoiding me, pretending. The tension in the air was unbearable, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. And yet, my husband noticed nothing. Or maybe he did. Maybe he saw the way I hesitated before reaching for my fork, the way my breath hitched just slightly when I shifted in my seat. Maybe he saw the way his son wouldn't meet my eyes, the way his fingers tapped restlessly against the table. But if he noticed, he said nothing. And I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. The hours stretched on, slow and endless. I busied myself with mindless tasks, laundry, dishes, wiping down counters that were already clean. Anything to keep my hands moving, to keep my mind from drifting back to him. But it didn't matter. Because even when I wasn't thinking about it, I was feeling it. The house had changed. It felt smaller, tighter, like the walls had closed in overnight, trapping me inside this unbearable silence. And then came the worst part. The part that made my stomach twist, my skin burn with something I couldn't name. I started to wonder, not if things could go back to normal, but if they even should. Because despite the guilt, despite the shame clawing at the edges of my mind, a part of me didn't want to forget. A part of me wasn't sure if I even could. Am I a bad person? Or was I just seeking something I had been missing for too long? That question haunted me, followed me like a shadow in the quietest moments. It whispered to me when I closed my eyes at night, when I stood alone in the shower, when I caught my own reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. I had never thought of myself as the kind of woman who could do something like this. And yet I had. Or had I? Because nothing had really happened. Nothing had been said outright. No lines had been crossed. Not in the way that counted. So why did I feel like I was drowning in guilt? Why did my stomach clench every time I heard his footsteps in the hall? Why did my hands tremble when I reached for my coffee cup in the mornings, knowing he was sitting just feet away, pretending the air between us wasn't suffocating? I could still feel it, his eyes on me when he thought I wasn't looking. And I hated the way my body responded. A rush of heat, a quickening pulse, an awareness I couldn't ignore. I was unraveling. Because the truth I didn't want to admit, was that I had already crossed a line. It wasn't just about what had happened. It was about what I had allowed myself to feel. The wanting, the curiosity, the hunger for something I had lost long ago. Loneliness can make people do things they never imagined. And I had never felt lonelier in my life. But what now? Could I keep pretending? Could I go on like nothing had changed, like I hadn't already stepped onto dangerous ground? Could I ignore the way my husband barely touched me, barely looked at me, while his son saw me? I didn't know the answer. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Because the deeper I let myself sink into these thoughts, the more I realized something I wasn't ready to face. A part of me, a dark, hidden, desperate part of me, didn't want to stop. I wanted to feel something again. And that terrified me more than anything. Then, one evening, my husband looked up from his phone, his voice calm. Steady. We need to talk. And just like that, everything came crashing down. I felt my breath catch in my throat. We need to talk. 3 simple words, but they landed like a hammer, shattering the fragile balance I had been desperately clinging to. My husband's voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that made my skin prickle, that told me he had been watching, noticing, putting pieces together in a way I hadn't expected. Or maybe I had expected it. Maybe I had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, knowing it was only a matter of time before everything I had buried beneath silence and denial rose to the surface. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his eyes. But all I could think was, does he know? Did he see it? Did he notice the way I had been avoiding his son? The way my hands shook when I passed him in the hallway? The way the air in this house had changed? Or was this about something else entirely? For a moment, I considered running. Not literally, but emotionally, deflecting, dodging, pretending I was too tired, too distracted, anything to avoid this conversation. But I couldn't. Because the truth was, I was tired of pretending. Tired of feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of my own emotions. Tired of the guilt and the longing twisting inside me like a vice, pulling me in opposite directions, making me question everything I thought I knew about myself. I nodded. Okay. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever he was about to say would change everything. So tell me, what would you do in this situation? Have you ever found yourself standing at a line you never thought you'd cross? Drop a comment below, I need to hear your thoughts. And if you love shocking, real-life confessions, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because trust me, you won't believe what happened next.